They said these children would never speak. 3 years. No words, no cries, no laughter. Doctors called it trauma. Therapists gave up. Even their father, the most feared man in New York, had accepted the silence. Then, in a crowded luxury restaurant, everything broke. The children froze. Their hands trembled. And for the first time in their lives, they spoke, not to their father, not to the guards surrounding them, but to a waitress standing nearby, poor, exhausted, and completely ordinary. They pointed at her and said one word: "Mom." The room went silent, because their mother had died 3 years ago, buried, mourned, forgotten, and the woman they were calling Mom was officially dead too. That night, a grave would be opened. A DNA test would shatter the truth, and a man who ruled the underworld would realize something far worse than betrayal. His family hadn't been destroyed. It had been stolen. Gina Evans woke up that morning with the familiar ache behind her eyes and the quiet calculation. Every poor person learns too early how to survive the day with just enough strength left to come back tomorrow. It was the last shift of the week. If the tips were good, she could afford her medication. If they weren't, she would stretch the pills again, tell herself the dizziness was nothing, and keep smiling anyway. She had no expectations beyond that. Certainly no dreams, and absolutely no idea that by nightfall, her name, her past, and her very existence would be questioned. The restaurant was everything Gina was not: polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the soft murmur of wealth disguised as conversation. She blended into the background the way waitresses were supposed to. Invisible, replaceable, safe. That was how she liked it. She had learned long ago that being noticed was dangerous. At the center of the room sat a man who bent the air around him. He did not raise his voice, yet people leaned away instinctively, as if proximity alone carried risk. Dante Valente. His name was not spoken often, but everyone knew it. Power clung to him like a second skin, dark and immovable. To his right and left sat 3 children, perfectly dressed, perfectly still, too still. They did not fidget. They did not whisper. They did not smile. For 3 years, they had not spoken a single word. Doctors called it selective mutism. Psychologists blamed trauma. The truth was simpler and crueler. Whatever had broken them had gone so deep that language itself no longer felt safe. Dante had stopped believing they would ever speak again. Silence had become part of their identity, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. Gina noticed them only because children like that always caught her attention. Quiet children were never truly quiet. They were listening to things adults could no longer hear. She approached the table with practiced calm, her tray balanced easily in one hand. Still or sparkling, she asked softly, her voice gentle without trying. No one answered. Dante gave a short nod. She poured the water carefully. Aware of his presence in the way, one becomes aware of a storm before it breaks. As she leaned forward, her sleeve slid back. A crescent-shaped birthmark, pale against her skin, was briefly exposed on her wrist. The first child froze. The second inhaled sharply, a sound so small it barely existed. The third began to tremble. Gina straightened, startled, her heart skipping in confusion. She hadn't touched them, hadn't spoken again, yet something had shifted, subtle and irreversible, like a fault line giving way beneath the surface. The first child reached out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. The second lifted a shaking finger and pointed at her, eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to recognition. The third opened his mouth and cried, not a whimper, not a breathy sound, a full, broken cry that sliced through the restaurant like shattered glass. Before anyone could react, before logic or reason had time to intervene, 3 small voices, unused, fragile, but unmistakably real, rose together and formed a single word. Mom. The sound did not echo. It detonated. Conversation died mid-sentence. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Even the waitstaff froze. Dante stood so abruptly that his chair scraped violently against the floor, the noise sharp and wrong in the stunned silence. His face drained of color as his eyes locked onto Gina's. He did not look at her like a man seeing a stranger. He looked at her like a man staring at a ghost. Gina's breath caught. The room felt too small. The air suddenly thin. I'm sorry, she said instinctively, not knowing what she was apologizing for. She tried to pull her hand back, but the child held on, fingers digging into her skin as if letting go might mean losing something forever. The children were crying now, all 3 of them, not loudly, but desperately, their small bodies leaning toward her, drawn by something deeper than memory. Panic rippled outward. Chairs shifted. Guards moved in. Get her, Dante ordered. his voice low but lethal. The words struck Gina like a blow. She barely had time to react before strong hands closed around her arms, pulling her away. Fear flared hot and immediate. She struggled instinctively, heart pounding. "Please," she gasped. "I don't know what's happening." The children screamed. It wasn't just crying. It was terror. Raw, animal terror that cut straight through the controlled chaos. They reached for her, small hands clawing at empty air, their bodies shaking violently as if separation itself was a wound. No one could calm them, a guest would later whisper. Not money. Not power. Not threats. Only her. Dante hesitated for half a second, just long enough for doubt to flicker through him like lightning. Then he turned away. "Take her to the car." The ride was silent except for Gina's uneven breathing. The SUV was armored, the windows dark, the city reduced to shadows sliding past. Dante sat across from her, his expression carved from stone. He did not ask her name. He already knew it. He opened the file in his hands. Gina Evans, age 28, no living relatives, multiple part-time jobs, medical records sealed following a car accident 3 years ago, status deceased. He read the word again. Deceased. Dante lifted his eyes slowly, deliberately, and looked at the woman sitting in front of him alive, terrified, breathing. If the file was wrong, then someone had lied to him. If the file was right, then the woman his children had just called mom should not exist. And that realization was far more dangerous than any lie. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. The gates of the Valenti estate closed behind the armored SUV with a finality that made Gina's chest tighten. She had never seen a place like this before: high iron fences, stone walls that swallowed sound, lights positioned not for beauty but for control. Everything here existed to keep things in, or to keep people out, possibly both. She was escorted inside without force, which somehow made it worse. No shouting, no threats, just quiet efficiency, as if her fear had already been calculated and dismissed. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar and antiseptic, an odd combination that stirred a flicker of nausea she couldn't explain. Her head throbbed again, sharper this time, like pressure building behind her eyes. Dante Valente watched her from the far end of the room as she was seated on a leather sofa that probably cost more than her annual income. He said nothing. His silence was deliberate, a tactic refined over years of interrogations that never made the news. Gina felt it pressing against her ribs, urging her to speak first, to fill the void. She didn't. Across the hall, behind a glass wall, the 3 children sat on the floor with a woman Gina assumed was a nurse. They were calm now, but only because they could see her. Every time she shifted, their eyes followed, tracking her with an intensity that made her throat tighten. She had no memory of them, no logical explanation for what had happened. And yet, when the smallest one leaned his head against the glass and whispered something soundless, her heart responded as if it recognized the gesture. "You're not scared enough," Dante said at last. Gina looked up. His voice was low, even, but there was an edge beneath it, something coiled and dangerous. "I'm terrified," she replied honestly. "I just don't know what you want from me." "That's the problem," he said. He placed the file on the table between them, but did not open it. "My children spoke today, for the first time in 3 years, and they spoke to you." "I didn't teach them that word," Gina said quietly. "I swear. I know. The admission came too easily." Dante's gaze never left her face, as if he were searching for cracks. They didn't learn it. They remembered it. The room felt colder. A doctor entered, older, careful in his movements. He asked Gina a series of routine questions: name, age, medical history. She answered automatically. When he asked about the accident 3 years ago, her vision blurred. Images flickered at the edges of her mind, rain against glass, headlights too bright, the sensation of falling. Then nothing. "I woke up in a hospital," she said slowly. "They told me I'd been lucky. No family came. No one asked questions. After that, my life just continued." The doctor exchanged a look with Dante. It was brief, but Gina saw it. They took her blood. Took her. She watched the vial fill, oddly detached, as if her body belonged to someone else. As the needle slid out, the dizziness returned, stronger now, accompanied by a sharp pulse of pain at the base of her skull. She pressed her fingers to her temple, trying to steady herself. Across the glass, one of the children suddenly stood and pressed both palms flat against the barrier. His mouth moved. Gina stood without thinking. It was instinctive, automatic. The room seemed to tilt as she crossed the space and mirrored his gesture, palm to glass. The moment she did,
The pain eased. The child's shoulders relaxed. The others moved closer, drawn by an invisible thread. Dante felt it then. Something in his chest shifted, unwelcome and undeniable. The results came faster than Gina expected. The doctor returned, his expression stripped of professional neutrality. "The DNA matches," he said. "All 3 children. Maternal link. The probability is beyond statistical coincidence."
Gina laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's impossible." Dante closed his eyes. He had spent 3 years building a world around loss, around the certainty that some things could not be undone. He had buried his wife. He had accepted silence as a permanent state. He had taught himself not to hope. And now this. "You're saying I gave birth?" Gina whispered. "To triplets." "Yes." Her hands trembled. "That can't be right. I would remember that." "You don't remember a lot of things," Dante said, opening the file at last. He turned it toward her. On the first page was her photograph. Not the tired woman she saw in the mirror every morning, but someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who looked back at the camera with confidence instead of caution. The name beneath it was not Gina Evans. It was Bianca Valente. Her breath caught painfully. The name struck something deep, like a key turning in a locked door. Her vision swam. The room spun. "That's not me," she said, but the words lacked conviction. Dante stood, towering over her now. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said, each word measured. "Or so I was told." Gina's legs gave out. She sank back onto the sofa, heart racing. "I've never been married," she whispered. "I've never lived this life. I don't belong here." Yet the children were watching her through the glass, their eyes bright with something dangerously close to hope. Dante followed her gaze. He had built his empire on control, on knowing exactly where every threat lay, but nothing in his world accounted for a woman who carried his children's blood and his wife's face, yet claimed no memory of either. Somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, a more terrifying possibility began to form. If Bianca Valente had not died, then someone had taken her life apart piece by piece, and the truth was only just beginning to surface. Night fell over the Valente estate with a deceptive calm, the kind that pretended nothing was wrong, while everything beneath the surface shifted violently out of place. Gina sat alone in a guest room that felt more like a holding cell disguised in silk and marble. The door was not locked, yet she knew better than to test the illusion of freedom. Nothing in this house was accidental, not the guards in the corridor, not the cameras hidden behind decorative molding, not the way the air itself seemed to wait. Her head ached again, deeper now, a dull pressure that came in waves. She pressed her palm to the back of her neck, breathing slowly, counting heartbeats the way she always did when pain threatened to take over. That was when she noticed it the way her fingers moved with practiced certainty, finding the exact point that eased the tension. Muscle memory, she thought. Another thing her body remembered that her mind did not. A soft knock broke the silence. Dante entered without waiting for permission. He looked different at night, stripped of the controlled authority he wore in public. The shadows emphasized the lines in his face, the exhaustion he never allowed anyone to see. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was too much between them now. Names, blood, truths that did not yet have shape. "I'm going out," he said finally. "There's something I need to see for myself." Gina lifted her eyes. "What a grave!" The word sent a chill through her. "You already said your wife is buried?" "Yes." Dante's jaw tightened. "But I've learned not to trust what I was shown." She hesitated, then stood. "I want to come." He studied her carefully, as if weighing risk against instinct. "It's not a place for you." "Neither is this house," she replied quietly. "If this is about me, about who I was, then I deserve to know." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once. "Get a coat." The cemetery was closed, iron gates locked against the night. Dante ignored them. His men moved with silent efficiency, cutting through barriers as if laws did not apply here. Gina followed him through rows of stone markers, her breath fogging in the cold air. With every step, the pressure in her head intensified, accompanied by flashes of sensation she couldn't quite grasp. Wet grass beneath her knees, the scent of lilies, the sound of soil hitting wood. They stopped before a simple headstone. Bianca Valente, beloved wife, devoted mother. Gina stared at the name until the letters blurred. Her chest tightened painfully. "I don't remember this," she whispered, though tears burned behind her eyes. "I should feel something." "You do," Dante said softly. "You just don't know how to name it yet." He gave the order. The men worked quickly, shovels cutting into earth that had already been disturbed once before. Gina turned away at first, nausea rising, but something held her there. Some pull she could not explain.
When the coffin was finally exposed and lifted open, the world seemed to hold its breath. It was empty. No remains. No fabric. No trace of a body that should have been there. Only sandbags, neatly arranged, and a thin plastic band resting where a wrist should have been. Dante reached for it with shaking fingers. Jane Doe, Project Genesis. The words struck Gina like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Dante hadn't caught her. The contact sent a jolt through her system heat. Familiarity. An echo of something intimate and long buried. Her head throbbed violently, images crashing through her mind without warning. Bright lights. A cold table. Voices speaking in clinical tones. Her own voice screaming, then silenced. The sensation of being cut open, not with malice, but with purpose. She gasped, clutching Dante's coat as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. "I was here," she whispered. "Not like this, but after."
I remember the smell of dirt. I remember thinking I wasn't supposed to wake up. Dante wrapped an arm around her without thinking, grounding her against him. The gesture surprised them both. "You were meant to disappear," he said grimly. "Whoever did this never intended for you to be found." Back at the estate, the night unraveled further. The doctor returned with more information, medical anomalies that made no sense for a woman with Gina's supposed history. Surgical scars hidden beneath old tissue, signs of procedures that had nothing to do with a car accident. "There's something else," the doctor added hesitantly. "Your brain scans show irregular activity, suppression patterns. It's possible memories were intentionally blocked." Gina closed her eyes. The idea felt terrifyingly plausible. "So everything I am, everything I remember could be a lie." "Not a lie," Dante said. "A replacement." Later, when the house finally quieted, Gina found herself standing outside the children's room. She hadn't realized she'd walked there until she was already at the door. Inside, the triplets slept peacefully, their small bodies curled together, breathing in sync. She stepped closer, her heart aching with a tenderness that hurt more than the fear ever had, as if sensing her presence. One child stirred and murmured something in his sleep. "Mama." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Behind her, unseen, Dante watched from the shadows. He had ruled cities, broken enemies, survived betrayals that would have destroyed lesser men. But nothing prepared him for the sight of a woman who might be his wife, standing at the threshold of a life stolen from her, loving his children without remembering why. The grave had answered one question. It had raised 1,000 more. And somewhere beyond the walls of the estate, the people responsible for Project Genesis were beginning to realize that the woman who should have stayed buried was very much alive. Morning arrived at the Valenti estate without warmth. Sunlight filtered there through tall windows, touching marble floors and expensive furniture, yet nothing softened the tension that had settled into the walls overnight. Gina woke with the sensation that her body had been running long before her mind caught up. Her head still throbbed, but beneath the pain was something else now, alertness, readiness, as if some part of her had stopped sleeping. She stood at the sink, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her felt unfamiliar in a way that went beyond lost memories. Her eyes seemed sharper, her posture more balanced. She lifted her hands slowly, noticing how steady they were despite the storm inside her chest. Whoever Bianca Valente had been, she had not been fragile. A soft sound drew her attention down the hall. The children. They were awake, sitting quietly at the breakfast table with a caretaker. The moment Gina stepped into view, all three turned toward her in perfect unison. No fear, no hesitation, just recognition. They did not speak, but their faces brightened, shoulders relaxing as if a silent alarm had been switched off. Gina felt it again, that pull, immediate and overwhelming. She approached them slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile calm. The smallest child reached for her sleeve, fingers curling into the fabric as if to anchor himself. "Good morning," she said softly, unsure whether the words were meant for them or for herself. Behind her, footsteps echoed across the floor. Isabella Rossi entered the room like she owned it. She was elegant in a way that felt deliberate. Every detail carefully chosen tailored dress, perfectly styled hair, a smile that never reached her eyes. Gina recognized her instantly, not from memory, but from instinct. This was not a woman who reacted. This was a woman who planned. "So," Isabella said lightly, her gaze flicking from Gina to the children. "This is her." Gina straightened without thinking, her body placing itself between the woman and the table. The movement surprised her. It felt natural, necessary. Isabella noticed. Her smile sharpened. "You're very comfortable here," she continued, turning her attention to Dante, who had just entered behind her. "For someone who walked into our lives by accident." "There are no accidents," Dante replied coolly. "Not where my children are concerned." Isabella stepped closer, heels clicking softly against the floor. "They need stability," she said. "Structure. A future that isn't clouded by confusion. You can't seriously believe this woman, this stranger, is what's best for them." The word stranger stung more than Gina expected. Before Dante could respond, Isabella reached out, her hand brushing toward one of the children's shoulders. The reaction was instant. Gina moved. She didn't remember deciding to. Her body simply acted. She caught Isabella's wrist midair, grip firm and precise, stopping her without force, but without doubt. The room went still. Isabella froze, eyes widening in shock before narrowing with something darker. "Unhand me," she said, voice low and controlled. Gina released her immediately, heart racing. "Don't touch them," she said quietly. The words carried more weight than volume. Even Dante felt it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the children began to whimper, eyes locked on Isabella with unmistakable fear. Gina knelt beside him, smoothing his hair with a tenderness that made her throat ache. The whimper stopped almost instantly. Isabella stepped back, her expression unreadable. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very interesting." She turned to Dante. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Those children don't need a ghost from the past. They need a mother." Gina looked up sharply. "They already have one." The words escaped before she could stop them. They echoed in the room, dangerous and irreversible. Isabella's gaze snapped to her. "You don't remember them," she said coldly. "You don't remember giving birth. You don't remember loving them. What makes you think you're entitled to that role?" Gina swallowed. "I don't remember," she admitted. "But they do. And right now, that's enough." Dante watched the exchange in silence, something heavy settling in his chest. He had spent years trying to give his children everything except the one thing they had lost. And now, without explanation, it stood in front of him imperfect, frightened, undeniably real. Later that afternoon, Gina sat alone in the garden, the children playing nearby under discreet supervision. Laughter broke free occasionally, hesitant but growing stronger with each passing hour. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, feeling something inside her loosen. Isabella's voice cut through the moment. "You're dangerous," she said, standing a few feet away. Gina opened her eyes. "I'm not trying to be. That's what makes it worse." Isabella crossed her arms. "You don't belong here. And eventually, Dante will realize that." Gina rose slowly to her feet. "Maybe," she said, "but until then, I'm not going anywhere." Isabella smiled then, sharp and knowing. "We'll see." That night, as Gina sat beside the children's beds, humming softly without knowing where the melody came from, Dante stood in the doorway watching her, the way she leaned toward them, the way they slept more peacefully than they had in years. For the first time since the grave had been opened, Dante allowed himself a dangerous thought. Maybe the real threat wasn't the woman who had returned. Maybe it was the one who wanted to replace her. The change did not announce itself loudly. It arrived in fragments, missed heartbeats, moments where the world tilted without warning, seconds when Gina's vision fractured as if reality itself were glitching. She learned quickly to hide it, to pause, to breathe through the dizziness until the edges smoothed out again. Fear had taught her how to endure quietly, but her body was no longer cooperating. It began with the headaches, not the dull pressure she had grown used to, but sharp, invasive pain that bloomed behind her eyes and radiated downward, as if something inside her skull were waking up and stretching. The pain always came after moments of closeness with the children. After she held them too long, after she reacted too fast, too precisely. Dante noticed. He noticed the way she scanned rooms automatically, eyes flicking to exits, calculating angles she shouldn't understand. He noticed how her hands moved when startled, controlled, efficient, ready to strike. And he noticed the way the children responded to her not just with affection, but with trust so instinctive it bordered on biological memory. The moment that confirmed his suspicion came late in the afternoon. A sudden bang echoed through the estate metal striking stone. Accidental, but loud enough to trigger alarms. Guards reacted instantly. Gina reacted faster. She pulled the children toward her, turned her body to shield them, and guided them to the floor behind a heavy table with movements so smooth they looked rehearsed. The entire sequence lasted less than 2 seconds. Silence followed. Gina realized what she had done only when Dante was staring at her, his expression no longer guarded, but sharp with something like dread. "You've never been trained," he said slowly. She shook her head, heart pounding. "I don't know why I did that, but her body did." That night, the pain became unbearable. Gina collapsed in the hallway outside the children's room, vision blurring as the pressure inside her head had spiked violently. Dante found her moments later, kneeling beside her as she gasped for breath, fingers digging into the carpet as if trying to anchor herself to consciousness. "Get the doctor," he ordered. The private medical wing of the estate came alive within minutes. Monitors beeped softly as Gina lay on the examination table, her face pale, her pulse erratic. Dante stood just outside the glass wall, fists clenched, jaw locked as the doctor studied the scans in growing disbelief. "This isn't normal," the doctor murmured. "There's foreign interference in her neural activity." "What kind?" Dante asked. The doctor hesitated. "Artificial." He adjusted the image, enlarging a section near the base of Gina's skull. There, faint but unmistakable, was a structure that did not belong too symmetrical, too precise to be organic.
"A neural suppression device," the doctor said quietly, "embedded deep, designed to inhibit memory access and emotional recall." Dante's blood ran cold. "You're saying someone put a machine inside her head," he said. "Yes," the doctor replied. "And it's still active." Gina stirred, eyes fluttering open. "What did you find?" she whispered. Dante stepped closer, his voice steady despite the fury building beneath it. "Someone didn't just erase your past," he said. "They controlled it." The words landed heavily. Gina stared at the ceiling, tears slipping silently into her hair. "So everything I am now is what they allowed you to be." The doctor finished gently. The name surfaced again, uninvited but persistent. Project Genesis. Dante left the room shortly after, his mind already racing through possibilities. Enemies, old alliances that suddenly felt poisoned. In his world, information was power, and someone had used that power to dismantle his family piece by piece.
Isabella Rossi arrived an hour later. She stood just inside the doorway, impeccably calm as always, eyes flicking to the monitor displaying Gina's vitals. "I heard she wasn't well," she said lightly. Dante turned slowly. "You heard quickly. I worry about the children," Isabella replied. "Stress isn't good for them. Neither is instability." Dante took a step toward her. "Neither is experimentation on human beings." Something flickered across Isabella's face so fast it might have been imagined. "Careful," she said softly. "Accusations like that tend to spiral." "Then perhaps you should help me stop it," Dante said. "Tell me who benefits from a program designed to erase a woman and turn her into a shadow of herself." Isabella smiled faintly. "You're chasing ghosts. Behind the glass?" Gina watched them, her mind fogged but her instincts screaming. Isabella's presence made the pain worse. Her heart raced, her skin prickled with warning.
When Isabella finally left, Gina's condition stabilized, but only barely. Later that night, Dante sat beside Gina's bed in silence. The children were asleep nearby, their small hands curled together, unaware of how close they were to losing her again. "I don't know who I was," Gina said quietly, eyes closed. "But I know this. I was never meant to remember." Dante reached for her hand, hesitating only a fraction of a second before letting his fingers wrap around hers. The contact grounded her instantly, the pain easing as if something inside her responded to him. "Then we'll make them regret that decision," he said. Gina turned her head toward him, searching his face. "What if remembering destroys me?" Dante's grip tightened, protective, unyielding. "Then we'll survive that too." Outside the room, unseen and unheard, surveillance cameras recorded everything. And far beyond the walls of the Valente estate, someone received confirmation that the device was failing.
Project Genesis had not accounted for one variable. Love had begun to interfere with the machine. The decision was made without ceremony, but it carried the weight of inevitability. There was no safe way forward anymore, only movement. Waiting meant giving Project Genesis time to adjust, to tighten its grip, to finish what it had started inside Gina's head. Dante understood that kind of enemy. Systems like that did not stop. They adapted. The location came from a buried channel Dante hadn't used in years, a line of information so old it predated half his empire. A private medical facility on the outskirts of the city, officially bankrupt, unofficially active, no records, no patients, no questions. The kind of place that existed precisely to hide things that should never surface. Gina listened as Dante explained the plan, her face calm despite the storm beneath it. Since the discovery of the device, her condition had become unpredictable. Moments of clarity were followed by flashes of pain so sharp they stole her breath. Yet her eyes were steady now, focused in a way that felt frighteningly deliberate. "I've been there," she said suddenly. Dante paused. "You remember it?" She shook her head. "No, but my body does." The words unsettled him more than he cared to admit. They moved after midnight. The children were left behind under the tightest security Dante could command, a decision that cut deeper than any tactical risk. Gina hesitated at the door, turning back once as if memorizing their faces. One of the triplets stirred in his sleep, murmuring something soft and unintelligible. Her hand pressed briefly to her chest before she followed Dante into the dark. The facility looked abandoned from the outside: cracked concrete, rusted gates, darkness swallowing its edges. But Gina felt it immediately, the hum beneath the silence, the wrongness of it. Her head pulsed, a warning rhythm that grew stronger with every step closer. "Something's wrong," she said quietly. Dante raised a hand, signaling his men to slow. "We expected resistance." "This isn't resistance," Gina whispered. "It's recognition. They breached the perimeter without incident, too easily." Corridors stretched ahead, lit by emergency lights that cast long, distorted shadows. The smell hit her neck sterile, sharp, familiar. Her vision blurred, fragments crashing through her mind masked faces, gloved hands, voices counting numbers she didn't understand. She staggered. Dante caught her arm. "We can turn back." "No," she said, gripping his sleeve with surprising strength. "If we do, they'll come for the children next." That stopped him cold. They reached the operating wing moments later. The trap sprang shut without warning. Gas flooded the corridor, colorless and fast. Alarms blared. Doors slammed down, separating Dante from half his men in seconds. Gunfire erupted in the distance, muffled and chaotic. Gina dropped to her knees, coughing as the pressure inside her skull spiked violently. "Dante," she screamed. He dragged her toward the nearest door, slamming it shut behind them as bullets struck metal. His lungs burned. His vision swam. But Gina was worse. She convulsed, fingers clawing at her temples as if trying to rip something out of her head. "Make it stop," she sobbed. "It's too loud. Everything is too loud." Dante pulled her against him, shielding her with his body. "Stay with me," he ordered, his voice rough but steady. "Look at me. Breathe." The gas thinned as the ventilation system shifted, but the damage was done. Gina collapsed fully this time, consciousness slipping as a sharp tone rang through the room, a frequency designed for one purpose only: to activate the device. Her body arched violently. Dante swore under his breath, fury eclipsing fear as he realized the truth. This facility wasn't just part of Project Genesis. It was the control center. They escaped through a maintenance tunnel marked on no map, guided by Gina's broken, instinctive memory. She moved like someone half awake, leading them through darkness with a certainty that defied explanation. By the time they emerged into the night air, Gina was barely conscious, her pulse erratic, her skin cold. Back at the estate, chaos followed them in. The doctor worked frantically, monitors screaming as Gina's condition deteriorated. The device inside her was no longer passive. It was failing and taking her with it. "This wasn't an accident," the doctor said grimly. "They triggered a response. The chip is destabilizing." "Can you remove it?" Dante demanded. "Not here," the doctor replied. "And not like this. Any attempt now could kill her." Dante slammed his fist into the wall, cracking stone. He had walked into a trap, knowing it was a trap, and still underestimated how far they were willing to go. Hours later, as dawn crept in, Dante stood alone in the children's room. Their beds were empty. The alarm came seconds later. Isabella Rossi's voice echoed through the estate's security system, calm and composed, laced with satisfaction. "You should come home," she said smoothly. "Your children are safe. For now." Dante's blood turned to ice. Behind him, in the hallway, Gina stirred weakly on the stretcher, her lips parting as if trying to speak. He turned just in time to hear her whisper a single word before slipping back into unconsciousness. "Run." The trap had not been the facility. It had been the distraction. And while Dante had been fighting to save the woman he loved, Project Genesis had moved for what mattered most: the children. The estate had never felt so empty. Sirens wailed softly in the distance, security protocols cycling through layers of lockdown that no longer mattered. Guards ran in disciplined chaos, voices low but urgent, weapons drawn as if force alone could undo what had already happened. Dante stood in the center of it all, perfectly still, his mind terrifyingly clear. The children were gone. Not missing. Taken. The difference mattered. Gina lay unconscious in the medical wing, her breathing shallow, skin cold beneath white sheets. Machines kept rhythm for her heart while the device inside her skull continued its quiet countdown. Dante stood over her only long enough to press his forehead briefly to hers, an intimacy stripped of ceremony. "I'll bring them back," he whispered. "I swear." Then he turned away. The security footage played again on the main screen. A single frame froze Dante's attention, a familiar silhouette in the corridor. A guard stepping aside, not forced, not threatened. Obedient. "Find him," Dante said. Dante. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. They found the traitor less than 10 minutes later. He didn't resist, didn't deny it either. His eyes were glassy, his mouth slack as if whatever he'd traded loyalty for had hollowed him out. "They said they'd kill my family," he whispered before Dante could ask a question. Dante looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. They lied. The man didn't have time to beg. The location came through an encrypted channel seconds later, delivered by a source Dante trusted precisely because he never asked why. A private compound outside the city, not medical, not corporate, domestic. A place designed to feel safe. The kind of place that hid horrors behind white walls and children's laughter. Dante didn't take an army. He took a blade. When Gina woke, it was to pain so sharp it felt like memory tearing its way back into her body. She gasped, fingers clawing at the sheets, the room spinning violently. The device inside her flared in response, a high-pitched whine ringing through her skull. "Stop," she whispered. "Please, stop." The doctor restrained her gently. Fear etched deep into his face. "She's waking too fast," he said. "The chip is reacting to stress." Gina's eyes snapped open. "The children?" She rasped. "Where are they?" Silence answered her. That was enough. She tore free with a strength that startled everyone in the room, ripping wires loose as alarms screamed. Pain lanced through her head, white-hot and blinding, but it only sharpened her focus. She staggered to her feet, every instinct screaming one truth above all others. They were in danger. She didn't know how she knew. She only knew she was right. Gina collapsed just outside the medical wing, vision narrowing as the device surged violently, punishing her for the attempt. She hit the floor hard, consciousness slipping again. But not before her mind latched onto something in image, raw and vivid. A white room, small beds, the smell of antiseptic and fear. Across the city, Dante breached the compound alone. He moved through it like death given form, silent, efficient, unstoppable. Guards fell without ever seeing him. Cameras went dark. Doors opened only once. Every step was fueled by a fury so cold it bordered on clarity. He found the room at the center of the building. 3 small beds, 3 terrified children, and Isabella Rossi standing between them and the door. She turned slowly, a smile curving her lips, as if she had been expecting him. "You came alone," she said. "That's brave. Or stupid." "Where is she?" Dante asked. Isabella tilted her head. "Still alive. For now. The device is unstable. Though, such a shame. She was almost perfect." Dante's hand tightened around the gun. "Step away from them." She laughed softly. "You still don't understand. This was never about you, or even the children. It was about control. About proving we could create life, erase identity, and rebuild it better." One of the children cried out. Isabella didn't flinch. Dante moved. The room erupted into chaos. Gunfire shattered glass. Isabella screamed as Dante disarmed her, sending her crashing to the floor. He shielded the children with his body, dragging them away as alarms blared throughout the compound. He didn't kill her. Not yet. Back at the estate, Gina screamed. The device inside her overloaded, memories surging violently to the surface, hands tearing her children away, voices promising she wouldn't remember. A woman watching calmly as her world was dismantled piece by piece. Her heart rate spiked. The monitors screamed. "She's crashing," the doctor shouted. Dante arrived moments later, children in his arms, blood on his hands, terror in his eyes. He dropped to his knees beside Gina's bed, gripping her hand as her body convulsed. "Don't leave me," he said hoarsely. "Please." Gina's eyes fluttered open. For a split second, she saw him clearly not as a stranger, not as a shadowed figure in fragmented memories, but as the man she had loved. "Dante?" she whispered. The device inside her screamed in protest. And then everything went dark. The children were safe. The enemy was exposed. But the cost had only just revealed itself. Because as Gina slipped into unconsciousness, the machine inside her head began its final response, one that neither Project Genesis nor Dante Valente could stop. Memory reclamation. Whether her body could survive it was another question entirely. The room was filled with sound before anyone realized what it meant. Not alarms, those had already faded into the background, but something deeper, more primitive. Gina's breathing changed first, shallow and irregular, as if her lungs no longer trusted the rhythm they had followed for years. Her fingers twitched, then clenched hard enough to whiten her knuckles. The machine inside her had crossed a threshold, and there would be no gentle way back. The doctor stared at the monitors, face drained of color. "The device is forcing a full neural release," he said. "It's dumping everything it's been suppressing." Dante stood at the bedside, one hand gripping the rail, the other wrapped tightly around Gina's. Her skin burned beneath his fingers, fevered and slick with sweat. "What does that mean?" he asked, though he already sensed the answer. "It means her memories are coming back." The doctor replied, "All of them. At once." Gina cried out, her back arching as pain ripped through her body. Images surged violently through her mind, unfiltered and merciless. She was no longer in the medical wing. She was on a metal table under blinding lights, her wrists strapped down, her screams swallowed by sterile walls. She smelled blood. Her own. She felt hands inside her body, not caring, not gentle, extracting life as if it were a resource. Then came the sound that shattered her completely. Crying. 3 voices. Newborn. Desperate. Hers. "No," she sobbed, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her temples. "Don't take them, please." Dante leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "I'm here," he said urgently. "They're safe. I have them. You're not alone." But Gina couldn't hear him. The past was louder. She remembered waking in darkness, her body weak, her mind fogged. Remembered being told she'd been in an accident, that she'd lost everything. Remembered believing it, because the alternative was too cruel to imagine. She remembered the woman watching from behind glass. Isabella's calm eyes, measuring, satisfied. The doctor swore softly. "Her vitals are spiking. This is killing her." Dante looked up sharply. "Fix it." "There is no fixing this," the doctor said. "The only way to stop the overload is to remove the device." "You said that could kill her." "Yes," the doctor replied. "And leaving it in will definitely kill her." Silence crashed down between them. Dante looked back at Gina, at the woman who had survived hell twice, once when her children were stolen, and again when her identity was erased. Her lips trembled as she whispered names she hadn't spoken in 3 years. He recognized them all. His, hers, ours. He corrected silently. "Do it," he said. The doctor hesitated only a moment before giving the order. The room transformed instantly. Lights brightened, instruments appeared. Gina's body was sedated just enough to still the convulsions, though her mind continued to fight beneath the surface. As the procedure began, the children stood just outside the glass, held back by a nurse. They watched with wide, terrified eyes as the woman they had found again lay motionless beneath harsh light. One of them pressed his palm to the glass, the same way he had done that first night. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling but clear. Inside the room, Gina's heart rate faltered. Dante turned sharply. "Let them in! They can't—" "Now." The nurse hesitated, then opened the door just enough for the children to step inside. They approached slowly, fear warring with instinct. When the smallest one reached Gina's side and touched her hand, something shifted. The monitors steadied, just slightly, as if her body recognized what her mind could not yet grasp. The doctor worked carefully, sweat beating at his temples. "The device is embedded deeper than expected," he muttered. This wasn't meant to be removed. Dante didn't move, didn't breathe. His world narrowed to the steady rise and fall of Gina's chest and the fragile hope standing beside her bed. Then the machine screamed. A high-pitched whine filled the room as the device resisted, sending one final surge through Gina's nervous system. Her eyes flew open, clear and focused in a way they hadn't been since the night she returned. She looked straight at Dante, and she knew him, not as a stranger, not as a man wrapped in danger and shadow, but as the husband who had held her hand when she was afraid, as the father of her children, as the love she had been forced to forget. "Dante," she said, her voice steady despite the tears sliding down her face. "I remember." The doctor removed the device with a sharp, final motion. The room went silent. For one endless second, nothing happened. Then Gina's body relaxed. Her breathing evened out. Her heartbeat settled into a strong, steady rhythm. The monitors stabilized, their steady beeping now a sound of life instead of warning. Dante sank to his knees, pressing his forehead to her hand, relief crashing over him so violently it stole his breath. He laughed once, broken and disbelieving. then closed his eyes. Gina turned her head slightly, her gaze finding the children. When she smiled at them, it was no longer instinctive or borrowed. It was remembered. "My babies," she whispered. They climbed onto the bed carefully, curling against her as if afraid she might vanish again. She wrapped her arms around them, holding them with a strength born not of fear, but of certainty. Outside the room, the night deepened. Project Genesis had failed. But the war was not over, because memory did not return gently. It returned armed with names, faces, and truths that demanded blood in exchange for what had been taken. And Bianca Valente had just come home. Recovery did not arrive softly. It came in measured breaths, careful steps, and long hours of silence where memory settled into place like armor reforged out after a war. Bianca Valente lay awake long before dawn, watching pale light creep across the ceiling of the medical wing. Sleep avoided her now, not because of pain, but because her mind no longer knew how to forget. She remembered everything. The accident had never been an accident. The pain in her skull had once been a needle sliding between thoughts. The voices she heard in fragments had names now. She remembered signing nothing, consenting to nothing, waking up restrained while men spoke of her body as a vessel and her children as assets. Project Genesis had not stolen her life in a single blow. It had dismantled her slowly, methodically, confident she would never find her way back. They had been wrong. Dante entered quietly, as if afraid the moment might shatter if he moved too fast. He stopped when he saw her eyes clear, sharp, unmistakably present. Not the woman he had rescued, not the ghost who had haunted his children's silence, but the wife he had lost. "You're awake," he said. "I never really went to sleep," Bianca replied. Her voice was calm, steadier than she felt. "I was just gone." He sat beside her, the space between them charged with everything that had been taken and everything that had survived. "Do you remember us?" he asked, though the way she looked at him already told him the answer. She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his with a familiarity that made his chest tighten painfully. "I remember your voice," she said softly. "I remember the way you used to hold me when I couldn't breathe. I remember thinking, when they took the children, that if I could just survive long enough to see you again, it would be worth it." Dante bowed his head, pressing her hand to his lips. The weight he had carried for 3 years shifted, not gone, but finally shared. The children entered the room soon after, quieter than usual, as if instinct told them something fragile was happening. Bianca opened her arms, and they ran to her without hesitation, climbing onto the bed, fitting themselves against her sides. This time, there was no fear in their eyes, no uncertainty. They knew her now, not just by instinct, but by recognition. Bianca held them close, breathing them in, grounding herself in the reality she had almost lost again. "I won't let them take you," she murmured, a promise etched into every word. Not ever. The days that followed were filled with preparation disguised as peace. Bianca healed quickly, too quickly. The doctor noted with quiet concern. Her body remembered strength the world thought it had erased. She walked the estate with measured confidence, observing everything. The cameras, the guards, the routines. She asked questions she already knew the answers to, testing loyalty, mapping threats. Isabella Rossi was still alive. That was a decision Dante had made. One Bianca now understood completely. Death would have been mercy. Exposure was justice. "They won't stop," Bianca said one evening as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city. "Genesis was never about one woman. I was a prototype." Dante nodded. "I've been tracking the funding, shell companies, political protection, medical boards paid to look the other way. And Rossi," Bianca added. "He approved the expansion phase. I heard his voice the night they took me. He called it necessary." Dante's jaw tightened. "Then he'll answer for it." Bianca turned to him, studying the man she had loved before the world broke them both. "This won't end with a gunshot," she said quietly. "It has to end with truth. Otherwise, someone else will build the same machine under a different name." He searched her face. "You're asking me to expose everything. I'm asking you to burn it down," she corrected. "Completely." That night, Bianca sat alone in the children's room long after they had fallen asleep. She watched them breathe, small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm, and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't dared to touch yet. Hope. Not the fragile kind, the dangerous kind that demanded action. In the shadows beyond the estate, moves were already being made. Rossi sensed the shift, the tightening net. He underestimated her still, assuming survival had softened her. That motherhood would make her cautious. He had forgotten who she was before they broke her. Bianca Valente had been raised in a world where power was language and silence was weaponized. Project Genesis had stripped her of her name, her memory, her children, but it had also taught her something invaluable: how monsters think. When the time came, she stood beside Dante in the war room, maps and data spread before them. The future laid bare in lines of strategy and consequence. The children were safe, guarded, loved. The pieces were in place. "This ends now," Bianca said, her voice calm, resolute. Dante looked at her, not as a man reclaiming what was lost, but as an equal standing beside a queen who had survived erasure and returned sharper than ever. Outside, the city glittered, unaware that a reckoning was approaching. The past had been reclaimed. The truth had been armed. And the final chapter would not be written by those who tried to erase her. It would be written by the woman who remembered and refused to disappear again. The end did not arrive in chaos. It arrived with precision. Bianca stood at the center of the war room as dawn crept over the city, her reflection faintly visible in the dark glass behind the screens. She wore no armor, no weapons, no symbols of power beyond her posture, and her eyes clear, unwavering, alive. This was not the woman Project Genesis had tried to erase. This was the woman who had survived it. The final move unfolded quietly. Files were released to authorities that could not be silenced. Accounts traced through shell companies too tangled to deny. Medical records decrypted and verified by voices too credible to discredit. Witnesses who had hidden for years stepped forward, no longer afraid. By the time the sun fully rose, Project Genesis no longer had a shadow to hide in. Don Rossi was arrested before noon. Not in a shootout, not in a blaze of glory. He was taken from his office in silence, his face pale as the weight of everything he had buried finally collapsed on top of him. Isabella Rossi vanished from public view shortly after. Some said she fled. Others said she was given a choice between disappearance and exposure. Bianca did not ask which version was true. Justice did not need spectacle. It needed finality. Days passed, then weeks. The estate slowly softened. Security remained, but laughter returned to the halls. Hesitant at first, then freer. The children spoke more every day, small sentences, quiet questions, voices still fragile but growing stronger. Bianca listened to each word as if it were a miracle, because to her, it was. One afternoon, she sat on the grass with them beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the property. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, warming her skin, grounding her in the present. One child leaned against her shoulder. Another traced patterns in the dirt. The third laughed an unrestrained, genuine sound that caught in her chest. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing them in. This was the life they had tried to steal. Dante watched from a distance, something unknotted in his expression that had not been there in years. He had always been a man of control, of calculated outcomes and necessary losses. Loving Bianca again, loving her fully, without fear of disappearance, was the one thing he had never been able to plan for. She felt him before she saw him. Turning, she met his gaze, the silent understanding between them effortless now. No questions, no doubt. They had crossed too much darkness together for uncertainty to survive. That night, after the children were asleep, Dante found Bianca on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before them. He joined her without speaking, his presence familiar, grounding. "They're safe," he said eventually. "All of them." She nodded. "So are we." He studied her profile, the strength there softened by something rare. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "Not because of them, not because of me." Bianca turned to face him fully. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said. "I'm staying because this is my life, because you are my husband, because those are our children, because they tried to erase me and failed." Emotion flickered across his face, unguarded and real. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, grounding himself in the simple truth of her warmth. "I lost you once," he said. "I won't survive losing you again." "You won't," she replied. "Certain? We're done surviving." Months later, the world moved on, unaware of how close it had come to repeating a nightmare. Bianca chose a quieter path than anyone expected. She testified where necessary, advised reforms where she could, and then stepped back, refusing to let trauma define the rest of her life. She built something new instead. Mornings were slow now, breakfasts loud, arguments trivial. Bianca learned the art of ordinary days with a reverence usually reserved for miracles. She learned which child needed reassurance, which needed space, which needed laughter most. She learned how to rest without guilt. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Dante knelt before her in the living room, not with a ring, but with a simple question in his eyes. She answered by pulling him up and kissing him. Laughter breaking through tears, neither of them bothered to hide. They did not need ceremony. They had already chosen each other in every way that mattered. The past remained a scar, but it no longer bled. Project Genesis became a case study, a warning, a chapter closed. Bianca Valente became a name spoken with respect, not pity. And Gina Evans, the woman who had survived invisibility, became a reminder that identity could be stolen, but never destroyed.
On a quiet afternoon, Bianca lay on the grass with her children asleep beside her, Dante's shadow falling protectively across them all. She looked up at the sky, impossibly blue, and allowed herself one final truth. They had taken her memory, they had taken her children, they had taken her name. But they had failed to take her future. And this time, nothing and no one would ever take it again.